This story is based on real events. Names, locations, and details were changed to protect the identity and privacy of the families involved. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when Daniel Webb found the stranger clinging to a fence post in the flooded creek behind his property. The man was young, maybe 25, with dark hair plastered to his skull and eyes that held something Daniel couldn't quite name. Desperation, maybe? Or danger. Daniel pulled him out anyway because that's what good men did in Oak Ridge, and Daniel Webb was known as the best of them all. President of the church council, volunteer firefighter, husband to sweet Catherine, who was 7 months pregnant with their first child. Everyone in town said Daniel had it all figured out. But nobody knew what Daniel felt when the stranger gripped his hand that morning, water streaming down both their faces, their eyes locking for a second too long. Nobody knew about the emptiness Daniel had been carrying for years, the questions he'd buried under 12-hour workdays and Sunday sermons. The stranger said his name was Jesse Carver, and he had nowhere to go. Daniel told Catherine they were just helping someone in need, that it was temporary. She smiled and made up the guest room, her belly round under her apron, trusting her husband, the way she always had. That was 4 weeks ago. Now Daniel stood in his barn at 2 a.m, Jesse's body pressed against his in the darkness, both of them breathing hard, both of them knowing this wasn't the first time. And it wouldn't be the last. Catherine was asleep in the house, dreaming about baby names and the life she thought they were building together. Daniel knew he was destroying everything. The reputation, the marriage, the respect of an entire town. But when Jesse touched him, none of that seemed to matter anymore. The flood had washed Jesse Carver into his life, and now Daniel was drowning in a completely different way. Tomorrow, Catherine would find out, and Oak Ridge would never be the same. Oak Ridge, Tennessee wasn't the kind of place where secrets survived long. Population 3,000, 2 churches, 1 diner where everyone knew your breakfast order before you sat down. It was a town built on trust, on handshake deals and neighbors who showed up when you needed them. And nobody embodied that spirit more than Daniel Webb. His family had farmed the same 200 acres for 4 generations. His grandfather had been mayor. His father had built the community center with his own hands. Daniel was supposed to be next in line for greatness. At 32, he had everything a man could want. A beautiful wife who loved him unconditionally. A baby on the way. Respect that money couldn't buy. But somewhere along the way, Daniel had realized he was living someone else's life. He'd never questioned it, never dared to look too closely at the feelings he kept locked away, until Jesse Carver stumbled into his world, half drowned and desperate. And suddenly Daniel couldn't ignore the truth anymore. This is a story about betrayal, desire, and the devastating price of finally being honest. It's about a good man making terrible choices in a small town that thought it knew everything about everyone. Before we dive deeper into what happened in Oak Ridge, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to know where you are in the world. Because stories like this, they happen everywhere. People are people, no matter where you live. Now let's get back to Oak Ridge, where Daniel Webb's perfect life was about to come crashing down in the most public, destructive way possible. And it all started with one decision on a rainy morning. The morning Daniel pulled Jesse from the creek, he told himself he was just being neighborly. The storm had been brutal, washing out roads and flooding basements all over the county. Jesse claimed he'd been camping up in the hills when the water rose too fast. He didn't have much of a story beyond that. No family, no fixed address, just a backpack with some clothes and a pocket knife. Catherine had been hesitant at first, standing in the doorway with one hand on her pregnant belly, but Daniel convinced her. "It's just until he gets back on his feet," Daniel said. A week, maybe 2. Jesse was quiet those first few days. He helped around the farm without being asked, fixing the fence Daniel had been meaning to get to for months, cleaning out the gutters, splitting firewood. He didn't talk much about himself, but he listened when Daniel talked. Really listened, in a way Catherine had stopped doing years ago. She was focused on the baby, on painting the nursery and reading parenting books. Daniel couldn't blame her, but it left him feeling invisible. It happened on a Thursday night. Catherine had gone to bed early with a headache, and Daniel was in the barn checking on one of the horses. Jesse appeared in the doorway, backlit by the porch light. And something in the air shifted. They'd been dancing around it for days, the tension building every time they were alone together. I should probably leave soon, Jesse said, not moving from the doorway. Daniel's chest tightened. Why? Because you know why. The silence between them was heavy. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat, could feel every reason he should walk away lining up in his mind like dominoes. His marriage, his reputation, the baby coming in 2 months, everything he'd built his entire life. Instead, he crossed the barn. Jesse didn't back away. When Daniel kissed him, it felt like drowning and breathing at the same time, like finally surfacing after being underwater for 32 years. They didn't talk about it afterward. Jesse went back to the guest room and Daniel slipped into bed next to Catherine, who mumbled something in her sleep and rolled over. He lay there staring at the ceiling until dawn, knowing he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The next morning at breakfast, Catherine chatted about the baby shower her sister was planning. Daniel pushed scrambled eggs around his plate and avoided looking at Jesse, who sat across from him drinking coffee like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Daniel had spent his whole life being the man everyone expected him to be, and in one moment he'd thrown it all away for something he couldn't even name out loud. He told himself it wouldn't happen again. That was the first lie. It happened again that night, and the night after that. Within a week, Daniel wasn't even pretending to fight it anymore. Catherine started noticing things in the 3rd week. Small things at first. Daniel coming to bed later than usual, smelling like the barn, the way he'd stopped touching her, stopped kissing her goodnight. She mentioned it once over breakfast, her voice careful. You've been distant lately. Is everything okay? Daniel felt Jesse's eyes on him from across the table. Just tired. Lot of work to catch up on after the storm. She reached for his hand. We can talk if something's bothering you. We're a team, remember? The guilt nearly choked him, but he squeezed her hand and smiled. I know. Everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine. Daniel was falling apart, torn between 2 impossible realities. During the day, he was still the man Oak Ridge knew. He showed up at the church council meeting, discussed the fall festival with Pastor Mike, helped old Mrs. Henderson fix her porch steps. At night, he belonged to someone else entirely, to Jesse, who made him feel alive in ways he'd never experienced, who saw parts of him Daniel had spent a lifetime hiding. The town started talking, though not about what was really happening. They noticed Jesse was still there, noticed Daniel had given him work on the farm. At the diner, people asked questions. Who was this stranger? Where did he come from? Why was Daniel Webb, whose family had roots deeper than the oldest oak tree in the county, letting some drifter live in his house? Just helping someone out. Daniel told them, over and over. That's what we do here. Most people accepted it because Daniel had never given them reason not to trust him. But a few kept watching. Betty Carson, who ran the general store and knew everyone's business, told her husband something seemed off. Sheriff Tom Reeves, who'd known Daniel since they were kids, stopped by the farm one afternoon. Everything good out here? Tom asked, leaning against his patrol car. Daniel was loading hay bales into the truck, Jesse working beside him. Yeah, why? People are curious about your house guest. Just wanted to make sure there's nothing I should know about. He's helping with the farm. That's it. Tom nodded slowly, his eyes moving between Daniel and Jesse. All right. But if there's ever anything you need to talk about, you know where to find me. After Tom left, Jesse spoke for the first time in an hour. He suspects something. He doesn't know anything, Daniel said, but his hands were shaking. That night, Catherine asked Daniel to feel the baby kick. He put his hand on her stomach and felt the flutter of life beneath his palm, and the weight of what he was doing crashed over him like a wave. This was his child, his wife, his life, and he was destroying it for something that couldn't possibly last, that had no future beyond these stolen moments in the dark. But when Catherine fell asleep, and he heard Jesse's footsteps in the hallway, he followed them anyway. The confrontation came on a Sunday morning, and it came from the last person Daniel expected. His mother, Helen Webb, showed up at the farm unannounced. Her face set in that expression Daniel knew meant trouble. Catherine was at church, helping set up for the potluck. Jesse was in the barn. Daniel was alone in the kitchen when his mother walked in without knocking. We need to talk, Helen said, setting her purse on the counter. About what? About what you're doing to your wife, to this family. Daniel's blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Helen's laugh was bitter. Don't insult me, Daniel. I've known you your entire life. I know when you're lying. I've seen the way you look at that man. I've seen the way you don't look at Catherine anymore. Mom, you're imagining things. Am I? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I came by 3 nights ago to drop off some things for the baby. Your truck was here. Lights were on in the barn. I looked through the window, Daniel. I saw you. The kitchen seemed to tilt. Daniel gripped the counter, his mind racing. You can't tell anyone. Can't tell anyone? Helen's voice rose. Your wife is 7 months pregnant and you're carrying on with some stranger you pulled out of a ditch. What were you thinking? I wasn't thinking. I don't know how to explain it. Then don't explain it. End it. Today. Send that man away and fix your marriage before it's too late. Daniel looked at his mother, this woman who'd raised him to be respectable, to do the right thing, to never bring shame on the family name. What if I can't? Helen's face crumpled. Then you're not the son I raised. Your father would be devastated if he were alive to see this. Dad's not here. And you don't understand what it's like to spend your whole life pretending to be someone you're not. So this is who you are? Helen gestured toward the barn, throwing away everything for some fantasy. Catherine loves you. She's about to give you a child. Doesn't that mean anything? It means everything. That's why this is killing me. They stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down. Finally, Helen picked up her purse. I won't tell Catherine, but only because she doesn't deserve to have her world destroyed while she's pregnant. You have until that baby is born to figure out what kind of man you want to be. After that, if you haven't ended this, I will tell her myself. I won't watch you destroy her life. She left without another word. Daniel stood in the empty kitchen, his mother's ultimatum echoing in his head. 8 weeks. That's all he had. 8 weeks to choose between the life he'd always known and the truth he'd been running from his entire existence. Jesse appeared in the doorway. I heard shouting. Everything okay? Daniel looked at him. At this man who'd changed everything. No. Nothing's okay. Daniel tried to end it. For 3 days he avoided Jesse, threw himself into farm work, came to bed early, and held Catherine while she slept. He attended the church service and smiled at the right moments, shook hands with people who still believed he was one of the good ones. He almost convinced himself he could do it, that he could bury this part of himself again and go back to being the man everyone expected. Then Catherine's sister Rachel came to visit, bringing her husband and their 2 kids. The house filled with noise and laughter, with talk about the baby and plans for the future. Rachel cornered Daniel in the kitchen while her kids ran circles around the living room. You're going to be such a great dad, she said, squeezing his arm. Catherine is so lucky to have you. Daniel felt like he was suffocating. He excused himself and walked out to the far pasture, where the noise from the house faded to nothing. Jesse found him there 20 minutes later, sitting on the ground with his head in his hands. Your mother-in-law is looking for you, Jesse said quietly. Let her look. Jesse sat down beside him. They didn't touch, but Daniel felt the proximity like electricity. We should talk about what happens next. What happens next is you leave. That's what my mother wants, what everyone wants. What do you want? Daniel laughed, the sound hollow. It doesn't matter what I want. I have responsibilities, a wife, a baby coming. I can't just blow up my life because I finally figured out who I am at 32. So you're choosing them. I have to. Jesse was quiet for a long moment. I've been on my own since I was 16, moved from town to town, never staying anywhere long because I learned early that people like us don't get to have normal lives. Then I met you, and for the first time, I thought maybe I'd found a place I could stay, someone who understood. Jesse, don't. I'm not asking you to leave her, I know you won't. But don't pretend this meant nothing. Daniel turned to look at him, at this man who'd somehow seen through every wall he'd built. It meant everything. That's the problem. They went back to the house separately. Rachel and her family left that evening, and Catherine went to bed early, exhausted from the visit. Daniel stayed up, sitting on the porch in the darkness, thinking about the choice he'd already made but couldn't quite accept. Jesse came out and stood beside him. I'll leave tomorrow. Make it easier for you. Stay, Daniel said. The word came out before he could stop it. Just a little longer. It was selfish and wrong and guaranteed to make everything worse. But Daniel wasn't strong enough to let go yet. He'd deal with the consequences later. He'd face his mother's deadline, Catherine's trust, the town's judgment. Later. Right now, he just needed a little more time before his world came crashing down. Jesse sat down beside him, and they stayed there in the darkness until dawn. The unraveling happened fast, the way disasters always do. It started when Betty Carson saw Daniel's truck parked outside Jesse's new apartment in town. Jesse had finally moved out 3 days earlier, Daniel insisting it was the right thing to do before Catherine had the baby. But Daniel couldn't stay away. He told Catherine he was running errands, picking up supplies. Instead, he drove to the run-down building on Maple Street and spent 2 hours in Jesse's arms, desperate and reckless. Betty told her husband, who told Sheriff Tom, who showed up at the farm the next morning with a look on his face that said he didn't want to be there. "Daniel, we need to talk inside, private." They sat in Daniel's office, and Tom didn't waste time. "People are talking. They've seen your truck at that apartment. They're putting pieces together, and it's not looking good." Daniel felt his entire body go numb. "What are people saying? That you're spending a lot of time with Jesse Carver. That something's going on that shouldn't be. I told them they were crazy. That you're a married man with a baby on the way. But then I started paying attention, and Daniel, I need you to tell me they're wrong." The silence stretched out. Daniel could have denied it, should have denied it. Instead, he said nothing, and Tom's face went pale. "Jesus Christ, Daniel, what are you doing?" "I don't know." "Does Catherine know?" "No." Tom stood up, pacing the small office. "This is Oak Ridge, Daniel. You know how this town works. Once this gets out, and it will get out, your life is over. Your reputation, your business, your marriage, everything." "I know." "Then why? Why would you throw everything away?" Daniel looked at his old friend, this man who'd been in his wedding party, who'd celebrated every milestone with him. "Because I've been lying to everyone, including myself, for 32 years, and I couldn't do it anymore." Tom sat back down heavily. "I can't protect you from this. Once people know, they'll turn on you. This town doesn't forgive things like this. I'm not asking you to protect me." "What about Catherine? What about your child?" The question landed like a punch. Daniel had asked himself the same thing 1,000 times, and he still didn't have an answer that made him anything other than a monster. That night, Daniel came home to find his mother's car in the driveway. His stomach dropped. Helen was sitting at the kitchen table with Catherine, both of them silent, Catherine's face streaked with tears. On the table between them was Daniel's phone. He'd left it at home that morning in his rush to see Jesse. Catherine looked up at him, her eyes devastated. "Your mother showed me the messages. All of them." Daniel's world stopped. Everything he'd been dreading, everything he'd tried to prevent, was happening. And there was nowhere left to hide. Catherine filed for divorce 3 weeks later. She moved in with her sister, refused to see Daniel or take his calls. The whole town knew within days. People Daniel had known his entire life crossed the street to avoid him. The church council asked for his resignation. Customers canceled their orders, and the farm that had been in his family for generations started bleeding money. His mother stopped speaking to him entirely. Oak Ridge, the town that had raised him and celebrated him, turned its back in unison. Jesse left town without saying goodbye, leaving just a note that said he was sorry for the damage he'd caused. Daniel knew Jesse blamed himself, but the truth was simpler and uglier than that. Daniel had made his choices. He'd known the cost and chosen himself anyway. And now everyone around him was paying for it. Catherine gave birth to a daughter 2 months later. Daniel wasn't invited to the hospital. He saw his child for the first time in a photograph his cousin sent. This tiny, perfect person he'd destroyed his life to avoid being honest with. Some people would say Daniel got what he deserved, that he betrayed his wife, his family, his entire community for selfish reasons. Others might say he was finally being true to himself after a lifetime of pretending. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, in that complicated space where people are neither heroes nor villains but just human, making impossible choices with no good options. Daniel Webb saved a stranger from a flood and lost everything in the process. Whether that was tragedy or inevitability,